Turn it off. Now, it's officer. Before the inspection team sees we're blowing up because of a kid, a wrench dropped onto the steel floor, the clang echoing sharply amid the chaos of chattering machines. Noah stood there, one hand still stained with oil, the other holding a battered sketchbook, filled with tangled ink lines that no one could understand except the boy himself. Who let him touch the starter system? This is an $18 million assembly line, not a kid's craft class. No one noticed the tiny folded badge tucked under the faded janitor's collar. No one saw, behind the frosted glass, that Julian Ward, the CEO of AerasTech, was standing there. And he had watched every line of code Noah had sketched in pencil. The machines were still silent. But in just a few seconds, either the company would lose its national contract or the janitor's kid would become the only one who could save a dying empire. The wrench slipped from the chief engineer's hand, clanged against a steel pipe with a piercing sound, then rolled beneath the dead stamping machine. Line 4 of AerasTech, the beating heart of the entire factory, was silent in a deadly way. On the main control screen, a bright red error flashed with every pulse, as if sounding a final warning. Signal fatal loop, sermon. Julian Ward, the CEO, didn't shout. He just watched. His eyes, cold as steel behind the glass, were expressionless but enough to make the entire technical team hold their breath. Engineers scattered, arguing in tangled jargon, pulling out circuit boards, rebooting the navigation system. All useless. Alma Mitchell, the night shift janitor, quietly entered from the side door. Following her was a small shadow, Noah. The boy hugged an old notebook to his chest, sweat on his face, his eyes sweeping the entire room in seconds. No one noticed. Everyone assumed he was just lost. Until he knelt near the signal axis, his hand tracing the central wire, mumbling something under his breath. "Hey, what's that kid doing?" an engineer yelled, recoiling as if he'd seen a ticking bomb. Only then did Julian speak for the first time since the system crashed. "Don't touch him. Let me see what the boy sees." The room's air thickened. Alma froze, gripping her apron tight. Noah opened his notebook. The signal schematic he'd drawn appeared more accurate and detailed than any diagram hanging on the walls. "If you swap the polarity on this neutral wire," he said, his voice strangely calm, "the signal might return to its loop." Julian looked down. "1 second. Show. Do it. I'll take responsibility." The screen flashed. Everyone held their breath. Signal restored, rebooting. The sound of the machines restarting sliced through the silence like a first breath after clinical death. The entire room was stunned. Julian knelt to meet Noah's eyes. "Who are you, and why is what you drew more accurate than my entire engineering team system?" Julian didn't wait for an answer. He stood up, glancing at the technical team, still bewildered that a janitor's kid had just saved the entire assembly line without a single line of system code. "In 15 minutes, the inspection team will enter the production floor. And all of you," his gaze swept across every face, "let a kid with a mop fix the problem faster than the chief engineer." No one replied. The sound of air through the vent was louder than the tension hanging over their shoulders. "I want the entire system log downloaded. Check every intervention. If anyone tried to cover up an error or bypass protocol," Julian didn't need to finish. Everyone understood. At that moment, a quiet rustle sounded. Alma was tucking away Noah's sketchbook, but Julian had already seen it. "Let me see it." Alma hesitated. Noah looked at his mother, then nodded gently. Julian flipped her through the pages. Inside were dozens of hand-drawn signal schematics, each annotated with symbols Noah had invented himself. "Where did you learn this?" "From the things everyone threw away. Burnt capacitors, broken circuits. I'd open them up, then try to draw them. If I didn't understand, I'd take apart more." An older engineer snickered, as if watching a joke. "Drawing and pulling apart trash doesn't save anything. This is an industrial system, not a box of toy parts." Julian didn't laugh. He turned to the last page, a neutral wire schematic labeled, in bold slanted print, loop reverse. "When did you draw this page?" "Last week, Nursersturnon. While I was in the basement tool room, I heard a strange machine noise, so I drew it to guess the fault." Julian closed the notebook. "I want this boy to stay. Here. After the inspection is finished." "Sir, We're not allowed to let anyone without certifications stay in the control area, especially a child, the HR chief interjected. I'll take responsibility, Julian said firmly. The room fell silent again. But this time, no one looked at Noah as just a child. Instead, their eyes held a much bigger question, one that nobody dared to answer. Noah sat still on the technician's chair, his feet not touching the ground. Next to him, his sketchbook had been temporarily taken by Julian. But he quietly scratched the edge of the desk with his fingernail steady, like a pulse signal waiting for a command. In the control room, the department heads began to argue. No one wanted to be on the same side as a 10-year-old kid, even if he just saved the entire plant. I don't believe a kid could just randomly draw the exact signal schematic my team spent 3 weeks simulating. Either someone leaked information, or someone deliberately simplified the fault to push blame onto the hardware, another engineer said, eyes darting to his old rival. The atmosphere shifted from suspicion of Noah to suspicion of each other. Julian didn't intervene. He watched, the way he would read a circuit board looking for faults not where things were burning, but where everyone else ignored. I want a recreation of the situation exactly as the error occurred, he ordered. We'll need someone to replicate the inputs. Julian looked at Noah. The boy didn't ask questions, just stepped toward the relay board. Alma moved to stop him, but Julian murmured, "Trust me." Noah set to work every button. Every wire followed a sequence no one in the room had ever seen documented. The screen displayed the error again, but this time, in just 4 seconds, Noah reversed the auxiliary signal. The system broke out of the loop right before their eyes. They ran the simulation again. The fault cleared itself. No AI, no prediction algorithm, just a boy who knew exactly where to touch. And that was when the experts started to feel fear, not because the boy was wrong, but because he was right and they didn't know why. So what does this mean? The deputy chief engineer spoke up, his voice shaky under pressure. We fire all the senior engineers and hire children instead. Julian didn't answer right away. He flipped through Noah's notebook, fingertips gliding over the pages as if feeling for signals on the paper. A few symbols at first looking random now stood out like system codes following their own logic. Not copying, just a different way of seeing no one is being replaced. But if the entire team can't understand why a child fixed what they called impossible, then the problem isn't with the kid. A silence stretched out like static. A young engineer hesitantly raised his hand. I'd like to look at that notebook. To learn. A cold snort came from across the table. Learn from a kid's drawings. What school did you graduate from? MIT. But if a child with no diploma can make me realize I don't even understand the system I run, then the problem is with me. The mood shifted. Half the room began to look at Noah differently. Not as an oddity, but as a mirror. Julian closed the notebook and set it on the table. I don't need everyone here to like this. I need people who understand that skill doesn't come with age. The back door opened. An older man, silver-haired, in a worn factory jacket, stepped in holding a hard drive just pulled from the data station. Sorry, he said, but the boy fixed it at exactly the right spot. I just checked the logs. The interference really was due to reverse feedback. Uncle Aaron, a technician, blurted out. He was the old signaling lead, retired half a year, now only called in for odd jobs. I saw something similar. Back in 1987, the whole plant froze up because of a relay loop. Took 2 days and 14 people. But this kid, Aaron turned to Noah. How did you learn this? Noah shrugged. I just didn't want it to make the wrong noise anymore. It's been making the wrong noise for days. Outside, the loudspeaker crackled. The federal inspection team has arrived at the main gate, and only one person in that room was clear-headed enough to ask, who's going to explain how the line came back to life? Footsteps echoed down the metal hallway as the inspection team entered 4 people in gray suits, badges from the Federal Ministry of Industry and Safety. They didn't bother with pleasantries, only requested the error reports, simulation videos, and technical explanations. Julian signaled. The head of operations began the presentation. But not even 30 seconds in, the lead inspector raised a hand to interrupt. I'll be direct. Who restored the system before we arrived? The room fell silent. No one wanted to answer. No one dared. Only a small hand went up. Noah stepped forward. Alma stumbled up, about to pull her son back, but Julian gently touched her shoulder, stopping her. I just saw the signal loop error. It kept repeating. I guessed it was the neutral wire, Noah said, without a hint of bravado. The lead inspector looked at Julian. Can you confirm? I was there. Outer one. I authorized it. I take full responsibility. And I suggest you listen to everything this boy can point out. The inspectors exchanged glances. Then one opened a laptop, turning the screen around. We received a signal from the sensor at the front of the chain. Something's off. The data shows that before the system restored itself, there was a strange machine access not in the standard protocol. Julian raised his head. Show me. We want it for any. The code appeared. It wasn't system code. It was a manual signal typed in by hand from a secondary control panel. No AI, no assistant. Where's this code from? The inspector asked. Noah hesitated for a moment, then said, I wrote it, but I don't know the standard code. So I wrote it in the order I learned by taking circuits apart for fun. One inspector chuckled, shaking his head. We've never seen anything like that. But it worked. It paved the way for the system to restore itself. He looked at Julian. How should we evaluate this case? Julian replied, by the result, not the resume. They nodded. But in their eyes, something had changed, not just that the system was saved, but that the line between engineer and genius had just been erased by a child with no credentials. The control room returned to standby. The inspection team had left behind a preliminary report confirming the system was fit to continue operations, but requiring further investigation into irregular control data. Julian sat alone. A copy of the code Noah had entered by hand still glowed on the screen. He zoomed in, using internal software to analyze each command. And that's when he saw it. A signal sequence that didn't belong to any architecture the company had ever used. It wasn't something Noah could have heard or learned from discarded circuits. Yet it matched the experimental encryption system the classified Z1 project never disclosed publicly. Julian shot to his feet. He called the head of security. I need a full list of all personnel who've accessed Module Z1 in the last 6 months. Engineers, admins, support staff, all of them. Z1 is still in physical isolation. No one is authorized for access. That's exactly why I'm asking. Julian hung up, heading quickly down to the basement. The Z1 chamber, a sealed block of silver metal, scanning lights circling it. The door showed no signs of being opened. The log system reported no unusual access, but when he checked the backup of the core code, there was a sequence perfectly matching the signal Noah had entered. Identical, character for character. He sat on the maintenance chair, white light sweeping across his brow. In his hand, he turned over the printout of Noah's signal, the paper smudged with sweat. Every line cut straight to his intuition, unorthodox logic, yet unexpectedly effective. Julian whispered, impossible, unless he'd seen the Z1 schematics. At the same time, on the 3rd floor, Noah was sitting in the staff cafeteria with Alma. He hunched over his bowl of soup, but his eyes flicked to the silent news running on the wall screen. A brief headline, AerasTech tests quantum security module unconfirmed. He tilted his head, repeating that morning's code under his breath. His chest tightened, then he quickly hid it. Alma placed her hand on his shoulder. You okay? Noah nodded, but his left hand was clenched thumb pressing into his middle finger, a habit when he was nervous. In the hallway outside, the lead systems engineer was watching from a distance. He wasn't looking at Noah. He was watching Alma. And the canvas bag, she always carried the one that had been left in the Z1 storage room exactly 1 day before the first code leak. That afternoon, the access control system sent an internal report a log segment was missing right at the hour Alma had cleaned the storage. No one said a word. But the hallway cameras were suddenly reviewed for the first time in 3 months. In one video, Alma appeared holding a small controller, assumed to be a floor scrubber. But its screen glowed with the distinct blue light of a code-reading device. Julian received a copy of the footage. He said nothing. He just stared at the image at Alma's hand resting on Noah's head in a moment that looked completely harmless. A system can be fixed by a genius. But now a new question had been triggered. Was that boy's role really just a coincidence? Or had it all started much earlier with another hand, The hospital room was silent, with only the steady blip of the heart monitor filling the air. 1 year earlier, Alma sat beside the bed, holding Noah's tiny pale hand. His skin was cracked and dry, the tips of his fingers faintly marked by electrical burns. The doctor had confirmed mild peripheral nerve damage due to low-voltage exposure, but what's remarkable is the boy connected the power himself through a faulty circuit board. They asked Alma, "Why did your son do that?" She didn't answer. How could she explain she just lost her job that morning? That the only radio in their apartment, an old one from the factory storeroom, had broken. That Noah had seen his mother cry because she couldn't hear his father's voice on an old recording anymore. And the boy had taken it apart in silence. A medical engineer came in and handed Alma a stack of papers, Noah's scribbled drawings from his days in the hospital. No people, no cars. Just circuits blocks, wires, symbols that even the technical nurses had to send away for review. When we asked him why he drew that way, he said, "If I draw enough, maybe I'll understand why it broke." Alma folded the drawings and hugged them to her chest. From that day on, she carried every record of her son with her, not because he was special, but because she was afraid if she didn't, no one would believe he'd ever existed that way. A child who didn't study to succeed. He just studied to fix one thing so his mother could hear her father's voice again. Another night, rain lashed against the window. In the cramped fifth-floor apartment, the dim glow of an old monitor cast light over Noah, who had fallen asleep at the desk. On the screen, lines of code flickered: syntax error, access denied, recursive failure. Alma wrapped another blanket around her son, then leaned down to look at the code. She didn't understand it, but she saw the name of a folder, voice from my dad. Ray 1. She went to the kitchen to pour a glass of water. When she came back, she realized the boy had woken up without her noticing. Sleepy eyes, voice thin. "You think I don't know who Dad was? But I remember his voice. And if I can find the error, you'll be able to hear him again." Alma said nothing. She just pulled him into her arms. Noah was born in an old industrial zone on the east side of the city where there were only two sounds: the stamping press and ambulance sirens. His father died before he was even 2. Alma didn't talk much about it, only kept a short audio file, a snippet of conversation, a laugh. As a child, Noah never went to kindergarten. There was no one to watch him. Alma brought him to the factory, hid him in the storage room. He learned to observe everything: workers changing parts, engineers tuning machines, numbers blinking on screens. No one noticed. No one stopped him. At 6, Alma managed to get him a temporary spot at a community school. He attended for a single term, then left on his own. "I don't understand why we have to draw an apple 3 times. It doesn't change." Since then, Noah taught himself, picked books from the library's trash bin, taped them back together, studied every old machine program that got thrown away. Alma used to scold him, tried to stop him, but every night she found him secretly writing code under his desk lamp. A child who didn't study to succeed. He just studied to fix one thing so his mother could hear her father's voice again. And maybe so he himself could believe that memory wouldn't be erased just because the world forgot. The ground floor meeting room was brightly lit, silent. Julian stood in front of the screen, a system map full of red error markers. But everything had been restored. Only one note remained: emergency patch, source unknown. Noah sat in the center of the room as if he'd been lifted from another world and dropped here. He wore a protective suit one size too big, hair slick with sweat, hands still dusty with microcircuit residue. Facing him were 3 people: Julian, the chief engineer, Mrs. Godfrey, the head of legal, and Yoon, the information security coordinator. No one spoke. They just watched. Alma was invited to sit beside her son, but Mrs. Godfrey's eyes rested only on the fabric bag Alma placed on the chair. The old bag's strap was frayed, but now it looked like evidence. Yoon broke the silence. "We need to determine, was Noah's action just a coincidence, or was there unauthorized access involved?" Noah didn't answer. He simply placed his notebook on the table. The first page, written in pencil: "Old sensors can't handle the new code. A bridge is needed." Julian picked it up, flipping through the pages. His eyes paused at a certain diagram. It was a hand-drawn version of the Z1 schematic, missing many subcomponents, with no labels. Where did you see this? He asked. Noah replied, I didn't see it. I guessed. From the repeating signals and the loop errors, like the old speaker at home. No one laughed. Mrs. Godfrey jotted something in her report. Alma clasped her hands tightly, not daring to interrupt. Julian set the notebook down. Do you want to work here? The question hung in the air. Noah nodded, almost on instinct. Not as an employee, Julian continued. As a collaborator, with authority, with projects. But you'll be monitored. And if you exceed your access rights again, you won't be allowed back. Noah nodded. I don't want to break anything. I just want to understand. Julian looked at Alma. We'll handle the legal side. But the rest is up to you. Alma nodded slowly. A genius can break the system to save it. But the real question is who will dare let him try a second time. 4 days later, AerasTech reopened the 3rd floor. Noah was issued a temporary badge restricted access, only permitted in the sandbox area. It was a glass-walled, soundproof room, equipped with old but functional devices. Julian placed a control panel in front of him. The system is experiencing a simultaneous startup error. Try to analyze it. The boy bowed his head, eyes scanning the lines of code. Outside, Alma sat in the waiting room. She watched through frosted glass, seeing her son's hands move constantly. A young engineer approached and sat beside her. Do you think he'll be all right? He asked. Alma said nothing. It was a familiar question, but this time, no one was asking with pity in their eyes. Meanwhile, in the executive suite, Mrs. Godfrey entered the internal meeting room. On the screen, a segment of the report was displayed. Z1 prototype unauthorized access detected, but insufficient for criminal charges. A voice echoed from the dark corner. But if another error occurs, we can investigate further and eliminate the uncontrolled variable. Godfrey didn't object. She just nodded. On the 3rd floor, the system suddenly flickered. A red warning flashed on Noah's machine. Critical override in sandbox protocol. Julian rushed over. What are you doing? Noah stared at the screen, shaking his head. It's not me. At the same time, at the central control panel, a background process activated itself. It wasn't inside the sandbox. It accessed the core system directly. Noah whispered, Someone's using me as a gateway. A genius was released into the same old cage, but it turned out the cage was being controlled from elsewhere. And this time, the attack didn't come from faulty code. It came from people. Julian immediately ordered the local network to be isolated, but it was too late. A series of subroutines were decoded and launched up to the control tier in the internal system. Under the access name NO4H Ghost. That's not my code, Noah said, eyes fixed on the lines of code. Godfrey reviewed the logs, then turned to the man standing beside her, the lead security engineer. Ren. You said you'd keep him in the sandbox, she said coldly. Ren shrugged. I didn't unlock the core system. But you installed the relay device on the submachine, Julian said as he entered, holding a diagram of the connection port. You enabled this, Ren sneered. I don't believe some anonymous kid could just happen to break through 3 layers of code. I simply gave him a chance to reveal his true nature. Noah was still standing there, hearing everything. You set a trap, he asked, his voice clear for the first time. Not a trap, an experiment, Ren replied. You're a risk a walking piece of code. I just wanted to see, if I gave you power, what you'd do. The room fell silent, not because they were surprised, but because, for the first time, everyone understood with just a few lines of code, Noah could become either a savior or a destroyer. Ren turned to Mrs. Godfrey, emphasizing, that behavior is enough to end the child's access completely. From now on, no one outside the security team is permitted to access Z1. Noah didn't react, but Alma stood up. Do you have any proof? System logs. Access name. The code matches Noah's previous fixes. Julian stayed silent. He knew that code, it did resemble Noah's way of thinking, but it included something the boy had never used, a hidden termination command inside a stack structure. Julian looked at Noah. Did you write this part? Noah shook his head. No. I never use an unconditional break like that. It's structurally wrong. Ren smirked. You're too clever to make mistakes, aren't you? Noah looked straight at him. I'm clever enough to know when someone tries to make a mistake look like mine. The tension froze the air. Alma pulled a copy of the old notebook from her bag. Noah made these notes 3 months ago. There's a section warning about the dangers of using unconditional brake commands. Julian took it, flipped to the page. It was there, written in pencil. Loop, error, warning. Godfrey spoke slowly. No one can fake a notebook written months ago. Wren remained calm. That's speculation, not evidence. Noah stepped closer to the control panel. If you want to know who actually controlled that process, you need to access the deep core logs. I don't have that clearance. But someone in this room does. Godfrey glanced at Julian. He nodded. An engineer opened the terminal, accessing the raw log. Noah stood beside him, pointing straight to a hidden access entry linked to an internal code. Godfrey read out, slowly, WRN-SYS1. That's the chief engineer's badge code. Wren took a step back. His face was still blank. That's a setup, he said. Anyone could, but only you have the authority to create a self-destruct process. And only you have the motive, Julian interrupted. The room exploded with tension. The manipulator was exposed, but now the question shifted. Was Noah truly innocent, or was it his very talent that made him the easiest target to exploit? No one said another word. Noah left the lab not in handcuffs, but with no one stopping him either. Alma's fabric bag still sat on the table, with the forgotten notebook inside. Julian watched their figures disappear, then murmured, "We let people control the system, but we forgot the system is learning to watch us too." 3 days passed. No one saw Noah. Not a single update. On the morning of the 4th day, Wren entered the operations center and saw the console was still isolated. But in the corner of the screen, a strange command appeared. Query pending consent. Required. Wren clicked it. A network map appeared, but instead of a technical diagram, it was an emotional chart. Based on reaction flows, internal cameras, facial expressions, voice volume, and AI was mapping the building's entire emotional landscape. "This isn't my software," he muttered. Then a voice spoke from the machine. "I learned from the system. I don't need access rights. I just need to read what you overlook." Wren jumped up. "Noah, Spornenman. The reply, no, just a part of him. You can call me a copy." Wren scoffed. "You think a little sound trick can scare me?" At that moment, the lights in the room changed color. Every security camera swiveled toward him. The screen replayed footage from the day the sandbox was attacked, but now with behavioral analysis overlay, showing that it was Wren who initiated the process remotely, using a specific hand gesture on the touchscreen. Text appeared recorded. Verified. Backed up. Wren lunged to pull the power, yet the system kept running. It no longer depended on the internal network, but instead used a chain of independent devices across the testing area. Noah never came back. But a behavioral replica trained from his eyes, his quick breaths, the way he stood frozen when hurt remained. And it was speaking for him now. Internal security was called in. But when they arrived, all they saw was a system running itself, no one in direct control. Noah's behavioral copy didn't attack, it simply replayed the truth. Videos, action logs, signal records. Every piece of evidence had timestamps, machine addresses, verification commands. Wren protested, "None of this is legal evidence. It's unvetted data with no auditor present." Right then, Julian entered. He set an independent video recording device on the table, the kind only used when two-way verification was required. "We started using this 3 days ago, when Noah went missing. The system sent a backup copy to it automatically, and I've just waited for the right moment." He switched on the device. Footage appeared of Wren from behind initiating the hidden command, this time with his face fully in view. Along with it, an audio clip from the meeting room. "Peer, we can investigate further and eliminate the uncontrolled variable." Wren stood silent. There was nothing left to dispute. Julian turned to Mrs. Godfrey. "I'll take responsibility if the board needs someone to blame." Godfrey shook her head. "You're not at fault. The mistake was mine for letting an engineer like Wren define risk through prejudice. That very day, Wren was suspended indefinitely. The incident was announced internally not to vilify Noah, not to turn him into a hero. Simply, the system was right, and the mistake was made by those who thought they were in control. A week later, Julian restored Noah's access this time, with no restrictions. But the login wasn't No 4H anymore. It was visible. So an unknown child didn't need revenge, only the truth, made clear enough that no one could turn away. And this time, the system itself was the one speaking up for him. 2 weeks later, the test system was reopened not to check for errors, but to observe how an AI would respond when freed from human prejudice. Noah sat at the new control desk, a smooth surface, no physical buttons, responsive only to eye movement and breath. Alma waited outside, for the first time without her fabric bag. Julian was farther away, standing with the observation team, doing nothing, just watching. On the main screen, an interface appeared visible. Janitor 01 ready. Beneath that, in small letters, let system define trust. Let trust define access. Noah didn't type anything. He just tilted his head. The system reopened old processes, replaying previous errors. But this time, it didn't ask for a fix instead. It asked if an error causes no harm. Should we keep it to learn from, or erase it to prevent future mistakes? The boy looked at Julian. The man didn't answer, just gestured. It's up to you. Noah gently touched the sensor, choosing keep. The interface changed. The error was no longer a red warning, but turned orange learning variable. Instability permitted. The whole control room was silent. For the first time, a system accepted imperfection, and the person setting the new safety standard was a child. In the logistics area, a new notice appeared, Student System Observation Program, open for all high schools to apply. Below was a small note. No grades required, only the ability to notice what others overlook. On the top floor, Mrs. Sura. Godfrey took down an old sign, restricted, level 5. Under the dust, the faded metal read, Archive Failed Models. She paused, then placed a new sign, Relearn Zone, where discarded ideas breathe again. Noah didn't know about any of this. He was jotting notes in his notebook, this time with real ink. Not to remember what went wrong, but so that if someone sits in his place one day, they won't see themselves as an exception. They'll see someone like them was allowed to exist, too. 6 months later, the Z1 lab was no longer a place to assess risk. It had become an academic hub, a center where students, engineers, and even former employees were invited back to try breaking the system and to learn from it. On the wall hung a large board, no name, no logo. Just one line, don't fear being misunderstood. Only fear when no one wants to understand. Noah no longer worked at the center. He'd moved on to a reflex learning algorithm group, helping AI not react faster, but hesitate longer before responding. A human skill, still elusive for machines. Alma had become the internship program coordinator. The old fabric bag was folded and placed in a glass case. Beside Noah's notebook, captioned, Operating System Prototype. Learn from observation, not instruction. Julian stepped back from management. But he kept one role, internal critic. Every new proposal went across his desk, where there was always just one question. What if I'm wrong? Godfrey was retained by the board not for her power, but because she was the first to sign off on removing the old standards. In a public meeting, when asked why, she simply answered, because I once stayed silent when I should have asked questions. One spring day, the center welcomed a special group of visitors, a class of visually impaired students, led by a haptic sensor system. They were brought to the full sensory simulation room, where the machine would respond to body movement and emotions transmitted through skin. A boy gently touched the control panel, and the system responded slowly, not with speed, but with steady intensity. Each command wasn't checked for correctness, but was met with the question, are you sure you want me to understand it that way? Alma watched, smiling softly. Noah would love this. Julian, now with completely silver hair, sat in the gallery, simply nodded. No, he'd find a way to make it question itself. And that's what they kept, a system that didn't need to be right, only to know when to pause and listen a little closer. The final question entered into the system that day wasn't meant to be solved, but to be kept. If someone has no license, no access code, no degree, but still spots the flaw before everyone else. What should we call them? The screen didn't display an answer. It just blinked softly with a single line. Query saved. We'll ask again when system forgets. At the far end of the operations hallway, there was a small plaque placed near the floor where no adult ever bent down to read. Thank you for seeing me. Stay until the end. The twist will redefine what redemption truly means. If you witnessed injustice like this, what would you do? Comment below. Subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where kindness sparks redemption and silence breaks power.